In our last lesson, we managed to get our player ship moving around the screen. In this lesson, we're going to add the asteroids and get them moving around the screen and rotating and being generated so that we get nice random boulders. So let's get programming. Hi again and welcome back to Bytes and Bits. I'm Bob Grant and this is the third part of my Asteroids course. In the last lesson we got as far as finishing off all the movement for the player ship. So we can now draw it on screen, we can move it around, we can change its direction, we can thrust in different directions, and we can also decelerate the player ship. So all of that now has been coded. And all of the movement functions that we wrote, we did that with the idea that we'd be reusing them for our asteroids. So why don't we get some asteroids floating around the screen? So going back into our TIC80 code then, we know here is where we were defining then our player ship and all of the sub-objects. So within our player ship object, we then have things like our position object, velocity, and so on, and our set of points. And we know that those are all the parts that we need to have inside our objects for our movement and drawing code to work. So our asteroids are going to have to contain this same information. So let's start thinking about how we're going to implement those in our system. Now we know that there are going to be more than one asteroid. So at the moment we only have one player ship, but we're going to need more than one asteroids. So we're going to need to have an array to hold those. So let's create an asteroids array, and we'll start off by just making that into an empty table. So we'll put some asteroids in there in a little bit. So that gets us a variable we can use. We now need to think about how we create an asteroid. So at various points in our game, especially at the start of the game obviously, we're going to have to create a number of asteroids and put them all inside this array so we can start moving them and shooting them and so on. So we're going to need some sort of function which allows us to generate an asteroid. So that's the first thing we're going to work on. We know then, as I said, it's going to need to copy a lot of the structure of our player ship. So this block here, all the way down to the end of our points, we're really going to have to copy that. So if I copy that from here, and then if we scroll down a bit to the end of our code, so let me go down here, and I think our wrap position was our last bit of code. Okay, so if we come in after wrap position, and we do a function called spawn asteroid, and we do end there, and really what we're going to do is we're going to paste that block of code in there. So our function spawn asteroid is going to create an asteroid and using this structure. So we're going to create a local variable called asteroid, and this is the one we're going to construct. And we're going to make that equal then to this object. So let me just tab these lines in so they all sort of line up correctly. And like that. And again, this is our spawn asteroid function. So let me just say this is one thing I always do, is I always mark my end statements so I know where they match up with. So I know that this end statement here matches up with this function definition. So we're creating a local asteroid object, which has then got this position, velocity, and all the same features that our player ship has. Now obviously then our points block here, we're going to need to change that to be an asteroid shape. So to begin with then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make our asteroid into a square. So let me just do that quickly for you. Okay, so that should now give us a square, which will be 16 by 16 as our asteroid. And that's really just so we can get something showing on the screen. So we've now got a function which will generate an asteroid for us. Now once we have generated our asteroid, so we have here our local asteroid, and we're going to make that. So our function needs to return that back to us so that we can catch it and then put it into our asteroids array. Okay, so we now have our function which will generate an asteroid, send it back to us, and then we can go and do something with that. So let's go back up to the top of the code then. If I go back up to my tick then, we have our asteroids array here, and that's what we're going to have to fill up. So we need to know how many asteroids to put in for our game. So let's create a function on a constant here called num asteroids. And we'll set that equal to 10 to begin with. And that's how many asteroids we're going to have to generate. And again, we want to be able to change this number. And this number may change when we get to different levels. It might increase as we're going along. We then need to think about when we're going to do this generating asteroids. So if we look at our game code, so we start off in this start state. And we come down and we wait here until we press the fire button, and then we set the game running. Now setting the game running, that's when we really need to generate then a block of asteroids to start the game off. So we need to, in this one here, generate some asteroids. But what we're finding is what we're doing really is we're actually initializing our game state at this point. So really that should be taken off into its own little function. So let me just cut that line of code out there, because we're going to need that bit of code. Sorry, that one there. And I'm going to call a function called init game. We're just going to call it init game. And that's where we're going to then handle all the getting the game ready to play. So let's come down here and create that function. So after the do play game function, we're going to create a new function in here called init game. And inside that function then, we're going to set our game state to play, but we're also then going to generate our asteroids. So we now need a function called generate asteroids, and this is really then going to create or use that spawn asteroids function to generate 10 asteroids and put them inside our asteroids array. So this is something we did in the Space Invaders course. So if you have a look at the explosions and dynamic arrays video, you'll see how this is done. So this is where I want you to have a go yourselves. So let's see if you can generate a generate asteroids function. So this is my generate asteroids function. So we've defined our function. I'm creating a local variable called asteroid, and I'm then doing a for loop. So I'm counting up from 1 to this number of asteroids that we set. So remember that was set to 10 to begin with. So what we're doing is we're using our local variable here, and we're saying make our local variable equal to this spawn asteroid function. So remember, spawn asteroid will generate an asteroid and then send it back to us, and we're then catching it in our local variable. Now I'm doing a little bit of extra stuff here where we're going to be wanting to move these asteroids and draw them. So I'm going to give them a little bit of speed, so a little bit of velocity. So what we're doing here is I'm giving them a velocity with a fixed speed of 0.2. And then the direction, I'm actually going to make that random. So what we're doing here is, let me just put this into a smaller font size. So I'm using this math.random function, which we've used a few places before, but this is now using math.random with just open and close brackets. That's going to give me a random number, a floating point number, so in other words fractions, between 0 and 1. It will never be 1, but it will be a number between 0 and 1. So that gives me a very good even spread of random numbers. And what we're doing is we're just going to scale that up to the range we want. So we want to simulate our direction going from anything between 0 and 2 pi. So if our math.random function is giving us a number between 0 and 1, if we simply multiply it by pi times 2, so 2 pi, then that will give us between 0 and 1 times 2 pi, so 1 and 2 pi, which gives us our 360 degrees for our direction. So we've got an asteroid, so we generate an asteroid here, we then set its velocity, and again we're going to play with this in a while, but we're now giving it a random direction. I'm also going to give it a rotation speed, and we'll come across why I'm doing that a little bit later on. But then the important bit now is that we do this table insert. So what we're saying is I want to put something into a table. I want to put it into my asteroids table. So remember, that's going to be our array which holds our 10 asteroids. And the thing I want to put in the array is my newly generated asteroid. Okay, so the real thing we need to do here is to do a for loop, spawn an asteroid, and put it in our table. Now once we've done that, we of course need to be able to see something. So we're going to need to have a draw asteroids function. So I'm just create this here for now. And really all the draw function does is it's going to use our draw vector shape functions. Remember we wrote that when we were doing our player ship, and we simply pass it one of our vector shape objects, and in this case it's going to be an asteroid. But what we need to do is, of course, our asteroids are held inside this asteroids array or this table. So we're going to use this special function again, so a special for loop. So we're going to say for index, comma asteroid in I pairs asteroids. And again, what this does then, it looks at our table called asteroids. So remember, each element in our asteroids table is an actual asteroids object. So it's going to pull each one out in turn. It's going to tell us which index that particular asteroid has, and then give us the actual asteroid in this local variable. So that's why we can then go and say draw vector shape asteroid, and as this loop goes round, it will pick out each individual asteroid in our asteroids array and draw it for us. So what we need to do now is to fire off this draw asteroids in the correct place, and we should start getting some asteroids on the screen. So if we go back up to our do play game function, and we'll see here then, so we update our objects and then we draw them. So that's us drawing our player ship, and this is us now drawing our asteroids. So at the moment we should generate then 10 asteroids, each of them being a square, and draw them in the middle of the screen. So let's have a look and see if that actually does that. And there we go. And there we have our player ship surrounded then by our 10 asteroids, which of course aren't doing anything at the moment. So the next thing we need to do is to make them move about the screen. So at least we know we've got 10 asteroids and that they actually are going to behave as some of these objects. So let's come back in again here. So we need to move our asteroids in our movement block here, and you now need to make a function called move asteroids. So have a look at our move player ship function, and that will show you how to actually move it. And again, we've written some functions which will allow us to very easily move objects around the screen. And then our draw asteroids function, which we've just written, where it uses that I pairs loop, you're going to need to use that to loop through each of the asteroids to move them. So have a go at generating a move asteroids function, and then we'll see if we can actually get these things moving around the screen. Well, hopefully you managed to get a move asteroids function going, and hopefully you've now got them sort of floating around the screen. But let's have a look at how I've done it here, just to make sure that we're on the right track. So again, we've got our move asteroids function defined. Again, we're using the same loop that we used in our draw asteroids function. So remember, that's going to look at our asteroids array, and it's going to pick out each individual asteroid object. And then we're going to give that a new position. So remember, before we wrote this function called move point by velocity, we give it one of our vector objects. So remember, our asteroid contains both a position and a velocity, and this function will move it for us, and we then capture that new position back in the asteroid position. We then have this wrap position function. So remember, that gives us that wraparound from either side of the screen. So we use that, and that should really then do our asteroid. So again, because we've already done all the coding for this, and because we're being very careful about how we structure our objects, it means that we can keep on reusing these reasonably complex functions to make our move asteroids. It becomes a very almost a trivial piece of code. We just simply say move it around and make sure it wraps around the screen. So we can very quickly get good reuse of our code. So let's actually see what this does for us then. So let's Control R and run that. And there we have our 10 square asteroids. And you can see that we gave them a random direction. So they're moving in random directions. And we can see they're moving around, and they're now wrapping around as well on the screen. So we've got the basis now for our asteroid display. Now, one thing I did whenever I did the generate asteroids function was I actually put in, if I go back up here, I put in this thing called rotation speed. And again, that was on our player ship as well. And that helped us then when we were doing the left and right buttons. But we can actually reuse that here. So I've set it to something. And if I come in here, I can actually update the rotation on my asteroid. So if I do this, so before I move it, what I'm doing here is I'm taking the rotation value in our asteroid object. Remember, that tells us which way it's pointing, and I'm simply updating it with this rotation speed value. So gradually my rotation angle is going to change. So if I now run that, press A to start, you can see now that we have our same idea where our square asteroids are now floating around the screen, but they're also rotating as they go. And that's going to give us quite a nice effect when we actually come to draw different shaped asteroids, which is actually what we're going to be looking at next. So going back into our code then, if we have a look in our spawn asteroid function, we can see this is where we're setting up the basic structure of our asteroid. So we're creating an asteroid object, our position, velocity, and so on. Those are what we need, and we'll have to have a look at those later on about how we set those up. But the first thing we're going to look at then is this points array, and this is what defines the actual asteroid shape. So at the moment, we're just simply defining it as a series of, well, it's actually 4 points. So it's our first point, our second point, third, fourth, and then back to our first again to complete the shape. And that's just simply going to be our square at the moment. But what we really want to head towards are some random looking circular type asteroids. So let's have a look at how we could build those using some code. So we're trying to get a random boulder shape, something like is being drawn on screen at the moment. But we need to work out an algorithm or a series of computer instructions that will actually generate this shape automatically. But if we were to simply select a series of random x and y coordinates, we wouldn't actually get a nice boulder shape. We'd get something more akin to this, which would be completely wrong for us. So if we go back to the boulder shape that we originally wanted to create, if we consider each of the points in this, we're in effect going around the 360 degrees of the boulder, with each corner being a little bit further round than the last. So we could start off by thinking about our boulder in terms of a circle. Each of our corners is going to take us a further bit round the circle than the last. So we could divide our circle up into a number of segments. If we then say that this green circle represents the sort of nominal diameter of our asteroid, we could then set up two limits around that. One would be the maximum distance from the centre that a point can be, and one could be the minimum distance. We can then place corner points on each of these blue segment lines, and we'll put them at a random distance from the centre of the asteroid, but a distance that's in between our maximum and our minimum values. Each of these points then is a certain distance from our central point and in a certain direction from it. So they're actually vector quantities. And from our previous work, we already know that any vector can be broken down into an x and y component. And in fact, we've already written the code that lets us do that. So all we need to do is to take each of these vectors for the corners, convert them into x and y components, and those will give us all the values we need then to generate our points array for our vector shape. So all we've got to do now is to work out the code that lets us do this. So going back to our spawn asteroids function then, these points that we just put in to make a square, we simply need to take those out and have our points array being initialized then to just an empty table. So after we've created our asteroid object, so just here is where we're going to then generate the actual shape of the asteroid. And there's some code then that's going to go in here, which will do that for us. So really what we need to do now is set up a couple of constants. So if I go up to the top of my code, and again, a lot of the time up here we are creating numbers or these constants which will describe how our software is going to work. And there's a few of those which we really should be setting up then for our asteroids. So we'll need to know how many corners we want our asteroids to have. And we can do that by then, as I said, making one of these constants. So I'm going to set a constant here called asteroid numPoints. And we're going to say that we're going to have 10 corners on our asteroids. And again, the whole idea then is if we use these values in our code, then if I ever want to have an asteroid, say, with 12 corners in it, I can come up here and change that. We also want to then set some information about the size of our asteroids. And again, there's different ways in doing this. The way I've done it for my code, and this is again just as a hint for yourself, is I've set up this idea of that nominal asteroid radius, which I'm setting to 25 pixels, and then saying that my maximum radius will be 25 plus 5, and my minimum radius will then be 25 minus 15. So in fact, I'll be getting asteroid radiuses between 30 and 10. So what needs to happen now then is for us to go back down to our spawn asteroids function and fill in some code here, which is going to create these points. So remember, we're going to divide our circle up into a number of segments. And again, that number of segments is given by that constant asteroid numPoints. We're then going to choose random radiuses and then generate those into a points array. So have a go at that. I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll come and show you how I managed to do it. So the spawn asteroid function then. So again, the first bit of then is as we've already written. So just creating the various data elements that describe our asteroid. And then this points array then being set initially then to this empty table. And we're now going to start inserting points into that. So our asteroid shape then, the very first point that we create obviously has to be the same as the very last point because of the way we're creating our points array. So I'm just simply going to create my first point then. So I'm doing this table.insert. So that's going to insert an element into a table. I need to put it into my asteroid points element, which is this one up here. And I'm simply then going to say, I'm going to set the x-coordinate equal to the nominal radius. Remember, I created some constants, an asteroid underscore rad, or for the radius, was that nominal value of, I think it's 25 at the moment. I'm then going to set my y value equal to 0. So that will give me my very first point, which will be along the 0 degrees angle, so along my x-axis to the right of my center point. And that then will be my first point, and if I actually scroll down a bit later on, you'll see that that's also then going to be my last point, so that I can finish off and close my asteroid shape correctly. The bit in the middle then is where we have to generate these random points. So really what I'm doing is I'm going to say I'm going to be selecting an angle. Okay, so remember, we're going to generate those segments going round the 360 degrees. I'm going to be generating random radiuses, or radii, as we go. I'm going to need to store that as a vector, and then we're going to translate that vector into its x and y components and store that in our points array. So the points we need then, so we've already done the first point. So we're going to so point here is going to be my little local for loop counter. So we're going to go from point 1, and then our end point will be asteroid num points. Remember, we had set that to 10 at the moment, minus 1. So we're going to do a further 9 points after that. We're then going to set our radius, and our radius has 2 limits. So our lower limit is my nominal radius minus this lower limit, and my maximum radius then is my nominal radius plus this maximum radius. So that gives me my minimum radius, which again was the 25 minus 15, which was 10, and my upper limit, which was the 25 plus 5, which was 30. And this math.random, if we give it some numbers inside there, so lower limit, comma, higher limit, it will then pick a random number between these two values. And it's an inclusive one, so it could be this lower limit, and it could also be this higher limit and anything in between. We then need to set up our angle. So remember, our angle is stepping round each segment. And if I just go to a smaller font size. So each step then, we know that 2 pi is a full 360 degrees. So each step we take will then be 2 pi divided by the number of points in our asteroid. So that will give us, in effect, a tenth of a circle every single time. Our point counter, we made that count from 1 to 1 less than the number of points, so that we simply then can simply multiply this step size by this point, and that will then give us the angle for this point that we're working on. So remember, our very first point we put in manually at 0 degrees. So this one here will start with point being equal to 1. So we will move 1/10 of a circle round, then 2/10, 3/10, all the way round to 9/10 of a circle all the way round. And that will give us our segments. So once we've got that radius and angle, we're going to make that into a vector object. So because all the code that we've used, so this one we're going to use here, this get vector components function, it assumes that our vector will have a speed value and a direction value. Okay, and that's just because we had been using that for our velocities. So the speed then will be the radius that we've set, and the direction will be the angle that we've set. So we need to convert that then to its x and y components. So remember, this function, get vector components, it accepted a vector as a parameter and sent us back an object which contained the two x and y components. So we're calling that function with our vector, which represents our radius and angle, and we're catching the x and y components in this variable. And that gives us everything we need to generate the point. So now we're simply going to insert this point, into our asteroid.points array with an x value equal to the x component from this returned object, and the y value equal to the y component from this returned object. And that's the end of our for loop. So that for loop will go around here and give us a further 9 points. And then, as we said, then our last point is going to then join back up to our first point. And that's our asteroid function. So let's see if that works for us then. So let's do a Control R. And there we have some asteroids of random shapes floating around on our screen. All we've got to do now is fine tune this. For to me at the moment they look a little bit big. So let's come back in here. But again, because we have been using our constants up here, we can simply change some of these. So let's say if I take that down to say 15, and I'll leave the plus value at 5, so that'll go up to 20. But I'll take this obviously down a bit because I don't want it going all the way down to 0. So let's take that down to, let's say, 6. Let's take it down to 8 and see what that looks like. So that'll give me radiuses between 20 and 7. And let's see what that looks like. And there we have some smaller asteroids. They are quite jaggedy, these asteroids. So maybe that's not quite what I want. So let's reduce the jaggediness, if that's a word, and let's take that down to say 6, and let's take that down to 4, and let's try that then. And there we have more sort of boulder shaped asteroids, and that to me looks like it's probably going to be about the right sort of size. Okay, so we'll go with that then. So we've got the shape of our asteroids sorted out now. But if we think about it, we're starting them off then in the middle of the screen. So let's go back down to our spawn asteroids function, or generate asteroids. So we know here, this is where we are generating our 10 asteroids when they start off. So we've got our asteroid equal to spawn asteroid here, and that will then generate an asteroid for us. At the moment we're setting its velocity to be this random direction but a fixed speed. So let's try and alter that then to be a range of speeds. So again, if we go back up now to our tick function, okay, so I'm going to have my asteroid, so max velocity, and we'll set that equal to 0.5, and asteroid min velocity, and we'll set that equal to 0.1. So if we go back down to our generate asteroids code, okay, so we can come in here and we can generate our velocity. So we want this to be a floating point number. So again, we're going to do the same idea as we did with this math.random down here. So math.random with open and closed brackets gives us a floating point number between 0 and 1. So let's do that. So that gives us between 0 and 1. We then want to multiply it by our range of values. Okay, so we're going to multiply that by our asteroid max velocity minus asteroid min velocity. So that gives us our 0 to 1 times this range, and then we need to add on our minimum value. So if I just organise this just a wee bit more easily to see. So we've got that, and then we're going to add on our asteroid min velocity. Okay. So what this does then, it takes a number between 0 and 1. We multiply it by our range. So our range there was from 0.5 to 0.1. So that will give us a number then between 0 and 0.4. And then we add on our minimum velocity. So that then gives us our range between 0.1 and 0.5, which was our 2 levels. So we've now got our asteroid with a random velocity and a random direction. And if we give that a go, so we should see now then that our asteroids, some are moving faster than others, and they're all then rotating. Okay, so again, if we come back in here, at the moment then we've got a rotation speed of set at fixed value. So again, if we go back up to our take one here, we could set a maximum, so asteroid max rotation value, and we're going to set that equal to 0.05. I think that was where we were going to do it. All right, so we come back down here. So we get at the moment we've got a value of 0.01. But what we're going to do now is we want some asteroids rotating clockwise and some asteroids rotating anti-clockwise. So let's see if we can work out how to do that. So again, we're going to use a very similar bit of code to here. So let's copy that down here. So it's math.random. And we then want to do a range. Okay, so our range is going to be twice our asteroid max rotation. Okay, so that will give us a range between, well, double this asteroid max rotation value. And then if we take away one asteroid max rotation value, that will then give us a range between minus asteroid max rotation and plus asteroid max rotation. So again, if we run that, you'll see now that we have some asteroids rotating one way, some asteroids rotating the other way. And some of those seem to be rotating pretty fast. So let's just knock that back a wee bit. If I come up here to my function, let's change that down to 0.3 and run that. Well, that's a bit better there. So we've got some rotating reasonably fast, such as that one, and some rotating slow, and some going clockwise, and some going anti-clockwise. So that gives us a nice random asteroid field to work with. So the next thing we need to do is to get the starting position of the asteroids worked out. So let's go back down to our generate asteroids function. And at the moment then, we are inside our spawn asteroid function. We're just simply setting the position to be 0, 0, so up in the top left corner of the screen. But what we want to do is we want to have them starting off somewhere along the top edge or somewhere along one of the side edges. So let's see how we can do that. So we're setting up here the velocity, we're setting up the rotation. So after this then, we need to set up the position of the asteroid. And really what we're going to do is we want some of them to start off along the top or the bottom edge, and some of them to start off along either the left or the right hand edge. But we can actually make this slightly simpler for ourselves. Because of the way we've set up our velocity, some will be travelling left or right, some will be travelling up and down. So really all we need to do is have them start either along the top edge or along the left hand edge. We don't have to worry about the other two edges, because some asteroids will start here and instantly flip across to the other side because they're travelling, they've got a X and Y component to them, and some will start at the top and instantly flip across the bottom. So all we have to do is have a choice between two things. So we'll need to choose whether they're going to start at the top edge or whether they're going to start at the left hand edge. And then we need to set the position, so a random position along the top with the X coordinate, and then using the Y coordinate equal to 0. Or if they're going to start along the left hand edge, we need to choose a random Y coordinate and then set the X coordinate to 0. So if you can then write a bit of code in here that will do that, then we should have our asteroids movement and spawning effects all completed. So here's how I've done it then. So here we have our decision-making statement. So I'm choosing a random number which will either be 1 or 2. And if it's equal to 1, then I'm saying that that's going to be an asteroid that starts at the top of the screen. So I'm setting my asteroid position then. I'm making a new object here, and I'm taking my x value and creating a random number between 0, and then remember we used a constant to describe how wide the screen was, and that's screen max x. But of course that was set to 240, which was the first pixel off the edge of the screen. So I want my random number being between 0 and 1 less than that, so 0 and 239. And then of course my y value equals 0. So that will give me somewhere along the top of the screen. And the else part then, so if it's not 1, it's going to be 2, and that will then give me a asteroid position where my x value is 0, and I choose a random y position, again between 0 and 1 less than screen max y, and that will give me somewhere down this left hand side. So at that point then we have our asteroids starting top and bottom, and we should now get that all correct for the start of our game, because again we don't want anything starting in the middle of the screen because that will instantly hit the ship. So let's run that and see if that works. And there we have asteroids starting at all the edges of the screen and then moving around through our playing area. Okay, so only one last thing to do. So at the moment all of our graphics are in this blue colour, so we haven't managed to get any different colours in. So let's see if we can think about a way of adding colour to our vector graphics. So coming back into our code, we know that we have a function called draw vector shapes, and this is where we actually draw the lines. So you can see here that we pick out the points in our points array and then we draw a line, and at the moment we've got this hard-coded value of number 8 in there, which is that sort of bluey colour. So all of our lines at the moment are coming in as blue. So what we need to do is we need to be able to control this number for each of our lines. So what we could do, and again we can do this first of all for our player ship. So we go back up to our player ship definition. At the moment in our points array then, we're specifying our x and y coordinates. But what we could do then is we could after that specify a colour for the line. So we could specify a colour in there and set that equal to some value. So let's have a look at our sprite editor. And we could draw our player ship. So let's say we want to draw our player ship in, well, let's say red. So we have, so that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's color number 6. So let's see if we can draw our player ship in color 6. So I'm going to put that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to specify a color. And what that will be, when we pick up a point, so remember the way our system works is it picks up the last point and then draws a line to this point. Okay, so that's going to be our first point. Then it will draw a line to this point, but we want it to draw it in this color. So the color specified for this point will be the color of the line being drawn to this point. Okay, so if we now come down to our draw vector shape one, so instead of that number 8, what we're going to do now is we're going to say it's going to be the rotated point dot color, and that should then draw it in that particular color. What we'll have to do then, of course, is if we try and run this at the moment, it won't have a color value for our asteroids. So we need to go to our spawn asteroid function. So he said if he could type. And inside here then, where we create our points, okay, so we're doing our points here. This is where we now want to specify again that color value. And for our asteroids then, let's draw them in, well, let's draw it in the traditional sort of white then. So that's going to be color number 15. So let's come across here and let's specify that as 15. And let's see what happens with that then. That's not very good at all. So let's see what's going wrong. So let's go back to our draw vector shape code, because again that's the one that draws the actual lines. And this color here, alright, if we look up here, we're our rotated point then. So remember, we are working through each point in our points array. We're creating a rotated version of that point, but that rotated version only, if we look at that rotate point function, so let's look at rotate point function, it only returns back the x and y coordinates of our function. So we need to, up here, instead of rotated point color, because that doesn't exist, you want to use the original points color. So if I take that bit out there and do that to point.color, let's see if that works. And there we now have our vector shapes being drawn. And again, our last line there isn't, so our asteroids, the last bit of our line is missing. So let's come back in here and let's go to our spawn asteroids function. And again, we are not specifying a color on our first and last point. So let me just copy that and come up here and do that. And then at the very end one here, I want to put a color in there. And now if I run this, we should find that we have got our full asteroids and ship in our colors that we want to use. And everything now is ready for the rest of our game. So we've done quite a bit of work on that, so that's good. Hour-long lesson for this one. But hopefully now we've worked through all of the vector shape drawing. So we've got our player ship able to move. We've now got all of our asteroid field produced with our randomly shaped asteroids. And we've now got the ability to color our vector graphics to make our program just that bit more interesting. So let's leave that for now on this lesson. I hope you're working through this and finding it fun creating all these vector shapes and working out these algorithms. And I'll see you in the very next lesson. Bye for now. Don't forget to visit the course pages for this project. There you'll be able to download the code for this lesson and get lots of extra hints and tips. You'll also get access to all my other programming, electronics and gaming projects. All the links are in the description below. For more games programming, electronics projects and retro gaming, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website.